And welcome to China Focus. I'm Shelley Zhang. Now, after last Sunday's election, Shinzo Abe will become the new Prime Minister of Japan. As we know from his last brief tenure as Prime Minister, he is hawkish on foreign policy. So what will that mean for the Senkaku/Diaoyu Island dispute in the East China Sea between China and Japan? Well, according to Abe, the islands are, quote, Japan's inherent territory. So joining us today to discuss Abe's election and what this will mean for China-Japan relations is analyst Chen Zhifei. So Abe has been very kind of hawkish, formidable. He says, you know, he's going to take a tough stance on this island dispute. Do you expect him to follow through on that?
Well, if you just mentioned his brief tenure as Prime Minister in 2007, if you use that as a precedent, as kind of some kind of comparison, I think he probably would not deliver perfectly on that score, because while he was hawkish last time, saying a lot of things that were way out of line, he took a trip to China within 2 weeks from his taking office last time and made some conciliatory remarks. So this time I'm thinking things have changed, of course, but I'm still waiting to see if there are any signs of significant change in Abe's attitude towards China, because he's a very experienced politician. Know that Japan have had 7 prime ministers in the last 6 years. So there have been a lot of political volatility, and a lot of transitional figures have taken the center stage. However, Abe is different. He's different because of his illustrious family pedigree, because of his political savvy, and it could be very well used by him to shore up his popularity. I mean, the crisis or the dispute between Japan and China over the territorial claims, and he could use it to as a kind of political posturing rather than some substantial changes in reality.
So you're saying kind of has more to do with Japan's domestic politics than it does the actual between Japan and China?
That's right. However, that will lead to the second issue, because I agree with you. Abe could be aggressive, could be a little hawkish, saying something that's again a little bit stupid or whatever from the political standpoint. But if you take it in a current context of Sino-Japan relations, you could see China's new leader, Xi Jinping, is in a similar position. Xi Jinping just made a visit in the south, in China Sea, and he took a look at the military capability, especially in the Navy area. And that sent a very strong signal outside the world that he wanted Chinese Navy to be ready for real war. And that's also what his original word is. So if these two young leaders are all in position to stake their claim to power with their nationalist sentiment and some kind of behavioral posturing, that can be a little dangerous.
Do you think there's actually a risk of war between Japan and China?
The war?
Or like, let's say some kind of like conflict that escalates between two militaries?
I think we have already passed the threshold, because if you check the news over the last 2 weeks, China has sent in more civilian vessels in the surrounding waters. China actually had an unprecedented flyover of that warplane over the island, and Japan also, in a very unusual manner, sending their F-15s to intercept Chinese aircraft. So to answer your question, I think that landmark watershed moment has already been passed. So what remains is any significant real changes to the two-country strategy. On Japan's side, whether Abe would really do what he said he would do, that is to change Japan's constitution to turn the current self-defense military power Japan has into a full-fledged army. On Chinese side, whether they were really sending more warships into the area and to fight every inch against Japanese.
It seemed like China was really trying to kind of push this to the edge right before the Japanese election. Like what you mentioned about the plane flying overhead from China over that territory happened last Thursday. So it was before the election. Japan scrambled their jets. But now, after the election, Abe's party won pretty decisively. Do you think there's still that kind of insecurity within the Japanese government that they feel like they have to they have to show something to the Japanese people in terms of this dispute?
You mean the Chinese reaction, right?
Right.
But I think Xi Jinping and his colleagues might want to use this opportunity to stoke some national sentiment so that they can be more secure in their control of the country, because they could sense that Abe would be hawkish in its election, at least in his rhetoric. And by sending over some airplanes flying over the island, they would definitely elicit some kind of reaction from Japanese along that line as well. And they can use it to tell Chinese people, to educate Chinese people, we're actually really doing things that you are expecting us to do. So if you read Chinese newspapers led by the English arm of the China Daily, I think it's called Global Times, you could see all kinds of words all over the place about how strong the new leader has been in dealing with Japan's aggression. So I think for Chinese leaders, they mainly do it for kind of a domestic consumption. So on a large scale, it's like two countries are engaged in a kind of political waltz, that kind of dance, and perfectly in sync with each other for their own political needs. However, some of the Chinese might not realize that the Japan's change could be real. Because if Abe really gets the political mandate to change the constitution, the long-term effects, repercussions for the regional stability will be significant.
Do you think the Chinese leaders had a preference as to who would get elected in Japan, the Democratic Party or the Liberal Democrats?
I think China leadership definitely would like to stick with the current status quo before Abe came into the scene. That is the frontier, that is the Democratic Party, because the Democratic Party has proven to be softer, to be a little more malleable or flexible in terms of dealing with the strained relations. As for LDP, it was more conservative. It controlled Japan since 1955 until 3 years ago, and has a long-standing relationship with America. And so now it's the moment when the Chinese leader didn't want to have active involvement of American military or political influence in the area, because they wanted to deal with Japan bilaterally to gain as much as they can. So they didn't want to have LDP, which could bring in Americans' influence or intervention at any moment.
Do you think the U.S. is going to do something about this or get involved?
Well, we're talking about one country and one thing they started. Now we're talking about U.S. strategy. I think U.S. should and will, because after President Obama took power, especially since last summer, he made it very clear that he was intending to have a pivot to the Pacific, and Japan would be the hub, would be the base where America could project its power, project its influence. So, of course, I think the current administration would definitely answer the request or the invitation of Japan to get more involved in the area.
Do you think they would get militarily involved?
I think so. What I heard, what I read was they are building more airports for more military personnel in that area, or in Okinawa and other areas where already American has presence. So I think it's a very important link in the overall strategy for Americans to be more active in that area.
So it's been 3 months since the Japanese government bought the remaining Senkaku Islands from a private owner and nationalized them. And since then we've seen kind of this escalation. And it seems like what you're talking about, you see a further escalation in this tension, in this kind of conflict between China and Japan. Well, do you think there's any chance of a de-escalation in the future?
Well, if you use Senkaku Island as a landmark, you could see some de-escalation, which is really happening. I think on that score, we're seeing a tacit agreement that neither country would send the people there. Neither country would deploy any military force there. So that landmark, I guess, is probably not accurate. That landmark is to a certain extent more accurate indication of Chinese intention, that is political posturing for domestic consumption. However, for the long term, as I mentioned earlier, Japan could have had some real change in their domestic policy and in their attitudes as well as strategy against China, especially in its military development and build-up of political political influence the area to deal with such kind of foreign intervention. I think that's possible.
So let's talk. Let's turn a little bit and talk about this from an economic angle. You have basically the number 2 and 3 largest economies in the world when you're talking about Japan and China, and we've already seen some kind of repercussion with the over the summer when there are protests in China over the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands, and a lot of they were destroying Japanese cars. A lot of Japanese companies are considering pulling out of China. Do you think there will be long-term economic ramifications here?
Well, I think short-term, the repercussions, the effect is really significant because we have seen consecutively 6 months of slippage of export from Japan to China. And today I just read the news, U.S. have overtaken China as #1 export destination from Japan. So that means the economic relations have become much more tenuous and strained. But in long term, China, would lose a lot from such a kind of animosity with Japan, because even though China has built it up as a world's factory, however, they really need the technology and expertise, know-how from Japan. Just to give you a quick example, a lot of people think China is the only place where iPhones and all kind of Apple products are assembled. Right. However, a lot of parts actually work coming in from Japan. Actually, especially the most sophisticated, like display and all those technologies were supplied by Japanese. So if without Japan's support, the world factory China has built up to be will have to work in a lower capacity. So that's really not something China can afford to take.
So will the economic kind of closeness of the two countries help de-escalate the situation over the islands?
So I think that could probably bring the two parties to the negotiation table, because Japan would not like to see that either. It's hurting their economic interests. So in long term, I guess probably the most significant change would happen in the area of constitution and Japan's possible resurgence as the military power that has some influence in that area.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Chen Zhifei, for joining us today to talk about this issue.
Sure.
And thank you for watching. For more on this and other topics in China, join us at ntd.tv.